Hey friends, my name is Justin. I'm one of the pastors at One Life, and thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Some of you are at home and you're watching this on YouTube and you're discussing this with your parents and your brothers and sisters and other people in your house. Some of you are in a huddle in our building in Concord, and so thanks for hanging out. Today, I'm going to start a brand new series of teachings, a brand new group of teachings called Famous, and we're going to continue looking at the life of David. David was the king of Israel back in the Old Testament. And David was described as a man after God's own heart. And that sounds fantastic, right? And you might think, man, David must have been amazing. And he did some pretty incredible things. And he loved God and he loved God's people. But there were also some times in David's life that he did some not so amazing things. Some times in his life where he made some really big mistakes. And there's one of these times, Aaron talked about it last week, where David was the king, which meant that he was over the army of Israel. And this one day he was sitting in his palace, sitting in his kingdom, and he looked over and he saw this woman named Bathsheba. And he thought, that woman is beautiful, and I want her to be my wife. David already had a wife, but he wanted her to be his wife. And Bathsheba was already married, so she already had a husband. But David didn't care about any of that. He just said, I want that woman to be my wife. Go and get her, and I'm going to marry her. David's heart was kind of rotten in this moment. Now here's the story gets crazier. Because Bathsheba was married to Uriah. Uriah was a soldier in David's army. David sent Uriah out to the front lines of the battle where he knew Uriah would die. And so essentially, David had Uriah murdered. Not essentially, literally, he had Uriah murdered so that David could have his wife. That's a crazy story. That is a really big mistake. In the Bible, we call this sin. Now, I want to read something to you to show you what we are called to do, what we're supposed to do when we make really big mistakes. And it's actually from the life of David. And I'm going to read it in a fun way. I'm going to read it as if David is doing a press conference in front of the media. Maybe you've been watching the Olympics and you've seen the athletes come out and they do press conferences and they answer questions. And that's how I'm going to read this to you, as if David is doing a press conference. So he comes out and the media is standing there and David makes a opening statement. He says this, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. He says, I stand before you today to address the recent rumors that I played a part in the death of the queen's husband, Uriah. This is true. I deeply regret my actions. I'm sorry. And I would like to sincerely apologize to Uriah's family and also ask for forgiveness from my wife, my children, and you, the people. And he says, I'll take any questions. The first reporter has this question. Your Majesty, this is the worst scandal this kingdom has ever seen. Why did you do it? David said, I was attracted to Bathsheba. And in that moment, I was willing to do anything to make her mine. I made a big mistake. The second reporter said, why are you telling this story now? Why are you telling people what happened? And David said, my friend and my advisor, Nathan, showed me the error of my ways. Nathan told me this story of a rich man who had lots of animals, lots of sheep. And he looked at a poor man who only had one sheep. And this rich man went over to the poor man and he stole his sheep. He took his sheep away. And as Nathan was telling me that story, I realized that I was the rich man. And I felt terrible. And I immediately prayed to God. And I confessed, I admitted what I had done. What a crazy story, right? What a crazy story. David does this terrible thing. Nathan, his friend, comes to him and says, look at what you have done. And David feels terrible about it. He realizes that he has made a massive mistake. Now, here is our big idea for today. When we make mistakes, we can make things right. When we make mistakes, we can make things right. Now, here's the thing. The first thing I want you to hear is we all make mistakes. The Bible tells us that we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We have all done things that God doesn't want us to do, right? We have all been selfish. We have all hurt other people. So we're all in the same boat. There are not some people who have not sinned and some people who have sinned. We have all made big mistakes. Now, maybe you haven't made a big mistake like David, but you've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. And all of those mistakes are on the same playing field, on the same level. There aren't some mistakes that are bigger than others. All of us have made mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we can make things right. How do we make things right? Well, the first thing I want to say is, how do we not make things right? Oftentimes, when we make mistakes, we do a couple things. One, we hide it. Right? We hide it. I remember whenever I was a kid, I broke this figurine that my mom had up on a shelf. I broke it. My brother and I were playing ball in the living room, and I threw a ball and it hit it and it fell off. And she had bought it over in London. And so I took it and I glued it together and put it back up on the shelf, and I never told anyone. I kept a secret. I hid it. Sometimes when we make mistakes, we do that. Sometimes when we make mistakes, we lie about it. Maybe sometime you have lied, or maybe you have been really mean to your brother or sister, and your mom or your dad come to you and say, what were you doing here? And you're like, I didn't do anything. And we lie. Sometimes we pretend like it never happened. Here's the thing. When we lie about it, when we pretend that it never happened, whenever we hide it, whenever we try to bury it, this does not lead to healing. This does not lead to forgiveness. In fact, it leads to more mistakes. So how do we make things right when we make mistakes? Well, there's this guy, his name is Paul, and he wrote this letter in the New Testament called Ephesians. In Ephesians chapter 4, he writes these words. He says, we will speak the truth in love. We will speak the truth in love. Can you say that with me out loud? We will speak the truth in love. Say it with me again. We will speak the truth in love. What Paul is saying is, when we make mistakes, the way that we make things right is that we speak the truth. We say what really happened. So when you make a mistake, you say what really happened. We call this confession. I did this. That's what we see David do through his friend Nathan. I speak it. I speak the truth in love. In love. And what this means is, even when I make mistakes, God loves me. God loves me. God has not left me. He's not gone away, but God loves me. So remember, when you make mistakes, God still loves you, and you can speak the truth in love and make things right. The other thing is, when we see someone else do something wrong, when we see somebody else make a mistake, we don't hammer on them, right? We don't make them feel terrible about themselves, but instead we speak the truth in love. So let me ask you just a couple questions. Number one, do you believe that God loves you even when you make a mistake? Do you believe God loves you? How do you think God responds to you when you make a mistake? I want you to talk about that. The second thing I want you to talk about is, when is a time that someone else has made a mistake, and how did you treat them? Did you treat them with love? Or did you hammer on them? Did you make them feel bad? All right? So, when we make mistakes, we can make things right by speaking truth in love. All right, I hope this leads to some great conversations in your huddles with your family, with your parents. All right, so go and talk, and remember to speak the truth in love. See you next time.